Please give Jim Taylor a hand.
Thanks very much, Brenda. These are the things that she mentioned that were in the blurb. I'm wondering if any of you have had any challenges with any of these things. These are the negatives. If you have, you're not alone. The Gallup organization did a big study called The State of the American Workplace, and they issued 2 reports, one in 2013 and one in 2016, with data gathered from almost 200,000 employees. And what they found was only 30% of employees are actively engaged in the businesses where they work. 20% are actively disengaged and actually sabotage the business somewhat. And it's usually because they have bosses from hell, is how the study describes it. And 50% are just kind of there, uninspired, but they're there. Another finding was that when you compare the top 25% of managed companies with the bottom 25%, the top 25% have 50% fewer accidents than the bottom 25%, and they have 41% fewer quality defects and significantly lower healthcare costs. And in the United States, that's a big deal. And it all comes down to culture. This is a quote from a woman who was part of the GTE Telecommunications Appreciative Inquiry. And she says, "When I was interviewed, I was asked to describe my wildest dream. And I described an organization where everyone could be involved in designing the organization's future. And then a few days later, when I thought about the appreciative inquiry process, I realized I was living my wildest dream." This is the kind of morale and buy-in that you get through this process called appreciative inquiry, which I may call AI from time to time, which is different from artificial intelligence, as it was used this morning, and farmers have another meaning entirely for AI. So, what I'm going to do now is give you a super compressed version of a workshop that I usually do in half a day or a full day. So hang on. So what is appreciative inquiry? The people who founded the movement use these definitions. It's the study of what gives life to human systems when they're at their best. It's a methodology for positive change. It's an invitation to a positive revolution. And it's a process for whole system transformation. And you can see there my first reference to Avon, Mexico. This is my definition. Appreciative inquiry is a positive, strength-based alternative to problem solving as a means of initiating and managing change in organizations. Why should you be interested? Appreciative inquiry can give your organization a competitive advantage in 3 ways. First, by fully engaging the creativity and talent of your existing employees, unleashing their potential to make the maximum contribution to your organization while experiencing the maximum amount of job satisfaction at the same time. It magnifies the speed at which you can execute positive innovations. At the end of an appreciative inquiry process, there is enormous goodwill and positive momentum for change. And thirdly, it creates an organizational culture that attracts the best and brightest talent to it and keeps it. And let's face it, in all organizations, talent is the key to success. There's been 2 approaches to managing change historically. The problem-solving approach has been around forever. And it asks, what are the problems here? It focuses on problems, deficiencies, what's wrong, what's broken, what isn't working, and seeks to find fixes to the problems. The appreciative approach has been around since 1987, when it was invented at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. And it asks, what works well here? What is this organization like when it's at its best? And it focuses on peak experiences, best practices, life-giving and life-enriching forces in organizations. And that may sound a little touchy-feely, but it's absolutely amazing how powerful this methodology is. AI is based on the ancient wisdom that whatever you focus your attention on grows. Therefore, appreciative inquiry seeks to discover the root causes of success rather than the root causes of failure. The term appreciative inquiry comes from 2 words, appreciate, which has several meanings. I'd like to draw your attention to the 3rd one there, to increase in value like money in a good investment appreciates. And inquiry, which is to seek to understand through the asking of questions. So, appreciative inquiry is used to make some existing positive quality in the organization appreciate or strengthen or grow in value by systematically inquiring into where this quality already exists within the organization, even if it currently exists only in very small amounts. Appreciative inquiry is used to get more of something. What would you like more of in your organization? Here's a partial list. It's not exhaustive, but it's a good place to start. Whatever positive quality you want more of in your organization, appreciative inquiry can help you get it by discovering where this quality already exists within your organization and then leveraging this to create more. On the back side of the handout that I've given you, there's a bunch of very impressive results that have been accomplished with appreciative inquiry. The one at the top there is GTE Telecommunications is the organization that the quote that I gave you at the beginning of the presentation comes from. And if you're interested, after the session is over, I would be happy to talk with you about some of the small companies that I've dealt with locally and the appreciative inquiry processes that I've led them through. Often an organization will undertake an appreciative inquiry in response to some kind of perceived problem. And right at the beginning, there is a fateful choice to be made. Are you going to focus on the negative or the positive? The negative approach is a problem-solving approach. Focusing on the positive is an appreciative inquiry approach. So here is the Avon Mexico example that I referred to twice. This is the presenting problem that the manufacturing facility of Avon had in Mexico. Women feel devalued in this company. They complain about male co-workers' attitudes towards them, about workplace harassment, and about limits on the jobs available to them. Now, this is pretty negative stuff. How can you find something positive to focus on here? The kind of suggestions, the questions that immediately come to mind are ones like these. Who is harassing women, and when are they doing it? What circumstances give rise to harassment? What kinds of harassment policies do we need? What is preventing women's advancement in the company, and how can we reduce the barriers? Those are kind of obvious questions. Avon hired consultants who used appreciative inquiry, and they asked questions like these. When have there been times that men and women have worked together in this company and the experience was very positive for both? What circumstances made these positive experiences possible? And how can we recreate these conditions so that men and women have more best experiences working together? And following this line of inquiry and expanding on it was so successful that not only did they get rid of the problem of harassment, in 1997, Avon Mexico won a Catalyst Award for being one of the best companies in Mexico for women to work in. And I like to use this example for several reasons. First, it shows the power of appreciative inquiry. It's not just a bunch of touchy-feely happy talk. It is a method that can bring about enormous cultural change. To turn a culture around 180 degrees from something really negative to being one of the best companies in Mexico for women to work in less than 2 years is an enormous accomplishment. Secondly, it really contrasts the difference between problem solving and appreciative inquiry. So when I do my workshops, I always ask the men in the room, how would you feel about a change process where the boss comes to you and says, hey guys, the women are complaining about the way you're treating them. What are we going to do about that? So I could ask the men here, how would you feel about a change process that starts that way? Defensive, blamed, maybe a little angry even at feeling blamed? Or the men might say, hey, we don't have a problem. We treat the women the same way we treat each other. We don't have the problem. Girls, you're the ones with the problem. So a problem-solving approach, when it deals with complex human interactions, can lead to endless arguments about who owns the problem and who's responsible for fixing it. Appreciative inquiry, because it's positive, has an entirely different energetic feel to it. And it's described in this quote from the paper that describes the Avon Mexico case. When people are asked to participate in a change effort targeted at changing behaviors, specifically their behaviors, they are ambivalent at best. When people are asked to bring their best forward for the benefit of the organization, they do so with enthusiasm and pride. Now, this smiling fellow is Jervis Bush. He is a professor at Simon Fraser University, a consultant who uses appreciative inquiry, and he has written extensively on the methodology. He wrote a book called Clear Leadership, and in it there's a chapter called The Appreciative Self. And actually this whole idea of developing an appreciative mindset is, I think, probably the most important takeaway from my session. In his chapter on the appreciative self, he uses two metaphors. One is tracking, like a hunter is tracking game in the forest in order to find it. And the second metaphor is fanning. And any of you who have built a campfire know that once you get it going a little bit, if you fan it and give it lots of oxygen, you can quickly turn it into a roaring blaze. So I'd like to read you a case study from this chapter on the appreciative self to show you the power of developing an appreciative mindset. So I'm going to read fast. Tim, actually one of the interesting things about this case study is that the problem person is the person with the power. And the person with the power is brought around by somebody who has no power. So here's the story. Tim, the consultant, flew in for his usual monthly two-day plant visit, and as usual was met at the airport by Fred, the operations manager. Tim had been working at the plant for 6 months and was credited with having helped create a lot of positive change in work relationships that was paying off in productivity and quality improvements. Fred, however, met Tim at the airport with a tale of doom and gloom. 2 weeks ago, the replacement for the regional vice president, who was physically based at this plant, took up his new position. The new RVP, Eric, had a reputation throughout the company as ruthless, demanding, aggressive, manipulative, and very hard to work for. But as a plant manager in another region, he had gotten results in more than one operation, and that had led to this promotion. Tim's clear leadership style seemed completely opposite, and Fred thought that Eric would quickly pull the plug on Tim's consultancy. As they drove back to the plant, Fred regaled Tim with stories of Eric's abusive behavior since arriving. Things sounded very bad indeed. Tim decided to try and keep an open mind. Once Tim arrived at the plant, a number of people came up to him to talk about their despair over the changes since Eric had arrived. At 10 that morning, the usual management meeting took place, but the atmosphere was even worse than it had been when Tim first started working there. Sure enough, Eric was bossy, sarcastic, and demeaning. People were completely closed down, and no truth-telling was going on. Tim decided that he would not be able to do anything for them if he got caught up in their sense of helplessness and doom. Instead, he began tracking the part of Eric that wanted to be a wise, compassionate, and loved leader. He looked and noticed at one point in the meeting when Eric had some good ideas about how to deal with a personnel problem. At a break, Tim mentioned how wise and compassionate that idea was. Over the next 2 days, Tim was in the presence of Eric 6 more times, and each time he ignored everything else about Eric and just paid attention to the part of him that wanted to be loved as a leader. Whenever he saw Eric do something that had the slightest wisdom or compassion, he said something about it. During lunch of the second day, Eric sent a message to Tim that he wanted to see him before he left for the day. Everyone, including Tim, assumed that Tim was going to be given the pink slip, and that would be the end of that. When Tim went to see Eric, however, something quite different happened. Eric almost broke down as he described to Tim his realization that he had gotten to where he was by being ruthless, demanding, and aggressive, but that he was at a management level now and those characteristics would not be effective, and that he was scared and didn't know what to do. He asked him to help him, and the work went on from there. It seems obvious to me, as I'm sure it is to you, that if Tim had paid attention to what he didn't like in Eric's behavior, he would quickly have been shown the door. Using an appreciative mindset and tracking the best parts of Eric allowed that part of Eric to recognize an ally, someone who saw what others weren't seeing, and it created enough trust in him to confide his doubts and fears to Tim. Let's face it, who are you going to go to for help and advice? Someone who sees the worst in you or someone who sees the best in you? The appreciative self creates followership by tracking the best in people and then fanning it when it sees it. So again, this story, this whole idea of developing an appreciative mindset, as I said, I think is the most important takeaway from my session. Because you don't need permission, you don't need a budget, you don't need anyone else to collaborate with you or cooperate. All you need to do is take control of your own thought processes. Easily said, not easily done, but it is within your control. Okay, the method, the model of appreciative inquiry that I work with and teach is the 4D model. It was developed by the Global Excellence in Management Initiative. The first D is discovery. Discover the best of what is, and that is done through inquiry. The second D is dream. Dream about what the organization could be like if it was at its best all the time. The third D is design. Use design principles to ensure that the values that were identified in the dream process are reflected in everything the organization does going forward. And the fourth D is destiny. And these are all the action plans and strategies that are used to bring the dream into existence. And ideally, it cycles around on itself to a new discovery process, and the process goes on and on as a method of continuous improvement in organizations. And of course, everything revolves around positive topic choice. So the first D is discovery. This is generally done using one-on-one interviews lasting between 1 and 2 hours. Conscious decisions about who interviews whom can add value to the process, and it uses pre-written questionnaires, and all of the questions have a positive focus. The questionnaires use introductory questions, and on your handout in the upper left-hand corner are the introductory questions, and these would be used for any appreciative inquiry. And it finishes off with concluding questions, which are in the lower right-hand corner, and these are also standard for any inquiry. And in the middle are topic questions, and the topic questions will reflect whatever the purpose of the inquiry is. So there's generally 3 to 5 topics, and in the handout that I've given you, there's 2 called Best in Class and Building Resilience. And what I'd really urge you to do when you go back to your businesses from this conference is to take a colleague for lunch and have a conversation using the introductory questions and the best in class questions. And I think you will be amazed at the kind of energy that is generated. And I think right now you're going to have a taste of the kind of energy that appreciative inquiry produces. So I'd like you with your partner, everybody is supposed to be paired up, to have a conversation using the building resilience questions. Okay, so you can have a look at those questions. One of you will probably have an idea of something occur to you before the other person does. Whoever gets the idea, okay, I've got an example I can talk about. Volunteer to go first and allow the other person to interview using the questions there. Okay, I'm going to give a heads up about 3 minutes in, so that you can change roles and have a nice conversation using these questions. So would you do that now, please? Have a conversation with your partner that I asked you to partner with using the building resilience questions. And if you haven't got a partner, look around for somebody else who doesn't have a partner and partner up, okay? Thank you. Okay, if we could come back together again. Could I have a few comments from people? What was that process like? What was that conversation like? Anybody? Don't all speak at once. Pardon me? Heartfelt? Can you say more about that? Uh-huh.
So that was an emotional journey for him, and sharing that with me, how did it feel
Okay, and did you know each other before you did this exercise? How do you feel you know each other now?
Quite well.
Yeah. This is one of the amazing things about appreciative inquiry is how powerful it is in building relationships. And as I commented earlier, making conscious decisions about who interviews whom, if you're doing an appreciative inquiry process in your organization, is really powerful. If you get people who don't like each other to interview each other using these questions, you're going to have a really profound impact on the relationship that they have. Simply because the questions themselves are so positive. They put you in touch with peak experiences and best moments from your work life. Because you start off, if you look at those introductory questions, it asks you how long have you been with the organization and what's the best thing that's happened to you since you've been with the organization. And when people are talking about best moments and happiest experiences, it creates a really positive form of energy, and it creates a really strong bond between the two people who share that conversation. Okay, other comments? Anybody else want to say what that experience was like? No? Okay, well, let's move on. What you've had is just a little taste of the discovery process of appreciative inquiry. Can you imagine what happens in a large organization where people have these kinds of conversations for an hour or two, talking about all this positive stuff, the best things about working in their organization, and then they come together to start dreaming about what the future of the organization could be, with all the positive energy that's been generated by the discovery process. Okay, the second D is for dream. And this is a group activity where the discovery process is done on one-on-one interviews. The organization comes together in groups and does the dream as a group activity of 6 to 8 people per group. So if you've got a really large organization, you'll have lots of groups of 6 or 8. If you're a small organization, you'll have few. And it involves imagining the best possible future for the organization that is grounded in the best of what has already been. So dreaming in the appreciative inquiry sense is not pie in the sky, airy-fairy dreaming. It is grounded in the best of what already has happened. So that makes it possible. And a vision or image of that best possible future is collectively generated. So this is kind of an art project. So one of the things that's interesting about appreciative inquiry is it draws on both the left and right hemispheres of the brain. Some of it is very logical, sequential, and others is artistic and creative. The third D is design. Churchill said, first we shape our structures, and then our structures shape us. So appreciative inquiry is an invitation to embed your most cherished values in the structures that guide the way things are done in the organization. So here's a couple of examples. The first one, this organization wanted to value openness and transparency. So in terms of architecture, the executive offices were deliberately decided they would put them on the first floor and they would have glass walls. So anybody coming into the organization could see the executives and what they were doing. I would think as an executive it would create an awful lot of pressure to have a neat office and not put your feet up on the desk if you wanted to relax. In terms of social architecture, the way things are done in the organization, they made it so that any one department could have their meeting shared with anyone else from another department as long as they RSVP'd in advance. And they also opened the book to all employees of financial information. This was a private company, not a publicly traded one where all the financial information is open anyway. So here's another value, human well-being. They wanted the organization to give everybody the best possible experiences that they could have. So in terms of architecture, they gave the secretaries the prime real estate. They got to have their desks by the windows because they're at their desks almost all day long. And the managers got their offices on the inside walls since they spend a lot of their time away in meetings with customers and suppliers and other kinds of stakeholders in the business. But they got compensated in that every 5 years they would have a 6-month paid sabbatical. So by putting the value of human well-being in the organization, you structure things in such a way that everybody gets the best possible thing that they can get out of it. The fourth D is destiny. And these are the specific action plans and strategies for bringing the vision into existence. And it's how the energy and focus generated by the inquiry plays itself out over time. And ideally, it helps to create an appreciative learning culture. And as I said before, ideally, the appreciative inquiry process cycles around on itself continuously. And some organizations like Nutrimental Foods, which is one of the companies that's listed on the back of your handout there, uses appreciative inquiry and every year as their strategic planning process. And it's so positive. Change is inevitable. The best way to predict the future is to create it. An appreciative inquiry is a positive, visionary approach to managing change and initiating change that energizes and empowers people and releases their potential. And as I said before, it makes it possible for them to make the maximum contribution to your company and experience the maximum amount of job satisfaction at the same time. It promotes buy-in and reduces resistance to change. Often, people do not want to change. But when you are using such a positive process as appreciative inquiry, people do buy into the change and are willing to go with it. And at the end of an appreciative inquiry process, there is a great deal of momentum for change. And people want it because they're on the same page. It strengthens relationships. And as the couple that shared the results of their interview showed, it's amazing how much relationship building goes on in the course of these interviews. And what you had was about 8 minutes in total. Imagine the strength of relationships that are built in an hour or 2 hours of dealing with these really positive questions and getting people in touch with the best of their experience at work. It builds loyalty, morale, and commitment, and it creates happier, more productive organizational cultures. And given how much time we spend of our lives at work, who wouldn't want to live in a happier organization? AI is based on a deceptively simple premise that organizations grow in the direction of what they repeatedly ask questions about and focus their attention on. AI does not focus on changing people. Instead, it invites people to engage in building the kinds of organizations they want to live in. That's hard to resist. And one final quote. Organizations, says AI theory, are centers of human relatedness, first and foremost. And relationships thrive where there is an appreciative eye, when people see the best in one another, when they share their dreams and ultimate concerns in affirming ways, and when they are connected in full voice to create not just new worlds, but better worlds. So you can take hold of the culture of your organization. And if you change it, all of the problems that were in that first slide will wither away, and people will buy into your ideal future, the future that you all want to share. And if you want to undertake such a process as that, I would love to help you do it. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you. Anybody? Yes.
Is this like a one-day workshop? Is that what you do?
I do it in a full day and also a half-day session. If you're interested afterwards in a full-day session, all I need in order to make it worthwhile to do a session is to have 6 people enrolled preferably from at least 2 organizations, and that is, sort of a minimum critical mass in order to put on a workshop. A minimum of 6, preferably from 2 organizations, but 6 is the absolute minimum. I also do a learn at lunch session that's 1 hour. So if you wanted to bring me in for a learn at lunch session, I could do that over the course of an hour, just to introduce your organization to what appreciative inquiry is. So it's essentially what I presented, but a little bit longer, and you have more time to deal with some questions. And in that case, you would probably use best in class as one of the questions. The reason that I used building resilience is because I thought that probably a lot of people would be paired up with people that they didn't know or were from different businesses. But when I'm coming into an organization and doing their business, then the questions are focused on something that's really relevant to the business.